NonViolent Peace Force, and he's both the guiding spirit and operations manager of it. And I've got to realize that through many of you, I have been lying when I have told you what Mel does. I keep saying that Mel drops unarmed peacekeepers into war zones to protect civilians. And that's really completely wrong because, well, they're never unarmed. They just don't carry firearms. And they don't carry firearms simply because it would ruin the weapons that they use so well and wield so deftly. Mel Duncan proves that, Mel's proved two things. Number one, that the rape, slaughter, and pillage in war of civilians is not a necessity, but rather it is a removable cancer. And the second thing Mel's done, he has taken that civilian casualties are things that do not require larger firearms to stop, but rather they can be halted with their own weapons that Mel has invented and they all use so successfully. Ladies and gentlemen, please meet Mr. Mel Duncan of the NonViolent Peace Force.
Good afternoon. And thank you, Bart, and thank you everyone who's here this afternoon. I really didn't find anything. When you said it, I founded NonViolent Peace Force. NonViolent Peace Force, the idea of trained unarmed civilians protecting other trained unarmed civilians, was a recurrent vision and had occurred and recurred to enough people. Gandhi was working on the Shanti Sena, the peace army, when he was killed. Others had picked up this idea and moved it forward. And so more than being a founder, I was one of the people who held the focus so that people could come together and create. I was struck when you called me and said that I was going to be given the Prometheus Award. And when I think about Prometheus, I think about how he stole fire from Zeus and brought it to us. And as I reflect more deeply, the first image that comes to my mind is to think about Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project, who stole fire and burned to death over thousands of people, and put in our hands for the first time the ability to destroy life as we know it. And fire, I think about the 70,000 fires that are incinerating our planet's lungs in the Amazon this summer. But let me tell you about another fire, a fire that burns more brightly within souls, a fire that continues to ignite our moral imaginations and forge our courage. As Gandhi reminds us, 1,000 candles can be lighted from the flame of one candle, and the life of that candle will not be shortened. So let me tell you a little bit about that fire. And if you remember just one thing from what I say today, please remember this, that at this very moment, there are more nonviolent peacekeepers, there are more mediators, there are more peace builders, there are more conflict resolvers, there are more nonviolent civil resistors on the planet than at any other time in history. That is not inconsequential. So the next time you get your feed on whatever screen you're looking at of the latest breaking news, remember that. Remember that the number of people who are actively working and giving their lives for peace is growing. So let me tell you how this fire came to me. 20 years ago, I was part of a fellowship sitting in a classroom called the University of Creation Spirituality in Oakland, California. I had just started a class, or a section on the poet mystic Rumi. You know, out beyond wrongdoing and right doing, there lies a field. I'll meet you there. So this section had just started. It was being taught by a Sufi, and I was sitting in class with my notebook and daydreaming, and I came to her staring into my eyes and saying, and your job is to enter the heart of your enemy. And I looked at her and then quickly looked away and checked to see if my classmates were all still sitting there, and they were. We didn't know each other. She had never met me. I had never met her. And I wrote in my notebook, enter the heart of my enemy. That's a good place to rip it out. And further down the page, I wrote, don't go back to sleep. This could change your life. So from that moment on, I was challenged to my very core about the way in which I worked, the way in which I organized, the way in which I saw the world. That was us versus them, right versus wrong, good versus evil. Of course, I always picked the right side. 50% plus 1 meant that we won. And when the student's ready, indeed, the teachers appear. And I was challenged to my very core to start seeing and understanding life from a point of unity. And that took me places that I never imagined. A year later, I was sitting in a Buddhist monastery with a Vietnamese monk whom a year ago I had never heard of, a guy named Thich Nhat Hanh. And I quickly learned I was way over my head. It was 12 hours of silence a day, and the other 12 hours we didn't talk very much. And I was clearly with people who were focused on very different things than whether the Cubs were going to make the World Series. And yet, one of the things that Thich Nhat Hanh taught was that we were no longer at the place in history where we can afford to take sides. The stakes are just too high. And he was saying that in 1999. So it was riding on a bus, leaving Plum Village, the monastery, when with my ever-present notebook, I wrote a reflection piece on what a nonviolent peace force might look like. So fire. 20 years after riding on that bus, I'm sitting in an area in the northern part of South Sudan, the newest nation in the world, and a nation that has been plunged into another bloody civil war starting in 2013. I was sitting in a dusty camp called Bentiu, where over 100,000 people had fled for some semblance of safety. And every day, the women have to leave that area and collect firewood. They have to come home and make fires. They cook. And as we see painfully, rape has been weaponized. Gender-based violence is part of a strategy of war. And so these women face rape both by government soldiers as well as by rebels. What we have found is that when 3 to 5 of the unarmed civilian peacekeepers accompany 20 to 30 women, the soldiers look and then turn the other way and leave them alone. With one exception, this has been totally successful over the past 5 years. And that exception was when one of our people was thrown to the ground, but our team quickly intervened and were able to stop that. This is one of the 10 methods that Nonviolent Peace Force members who now come from 35 different countries use to protect civilians not only in South Sudan, but places like Iraq, Burma or Myanmar, and Mindanao. We do not bring more guns into areas that are already riven with violence. We don't need to. In fact, we can be more effective without guns. And we have shown that this has worked in a variety of violent places around the world. So it can no longer be dismissed as impossible. In fact, there's over 40 organizations that are now doing unarmed civilian protection in various parts of the world in 24 different places. And that's not because any of us went out and organized. It's because people are picking up and understanding this way of dealing with violent conflict. Excuse me, I moved to the wrong page. The French paleontologist and theologian Teilhard de Chardin, who is someone who has troubled and challenged me since I was 20, said there exists in all beings a common center through which they meet together at a deeper level. We have that common center. Beyond the violent divisions that rage across our country lies a greater unity. We cannot ignore the white supremacy and the misogyny that is given license today and is so brought out into the open. Such hate must be resisted and transformed, but at the same time, we can walk bravely through the flames of hatred to the place of creativity and unity that lies deep within all of us. We are not going to get much farther if we continue to have us versus them. Within all of us flickers that moral imagination that can be addressed, that can be opened up, that can be supported. And Teilhard also said that, someday, after mastering the winds and the waves and the tides and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire. It is within all of us. So I do want to close by saying that I humbly accept this award on behalf of those who have shared their dreams and their hopes and their prayers and their aspiration, their labor, often volunteer labor, their wealth to co-create NonViolent Peace Force, and especially those unarmed civilian protectors who are in war zones working with local partners, especially women's protection teams, at this very moment. And I can only truly accept this award on their behalf. So thank you very much.
Now I want to ask you, here's a real simple question for you, Dale. We're talking about Mel Duncan, and so you are now in a village in the Sudan. There's women and children. Some fellows with armed rifles come into the village in Sudan, and they say, we want to loot everything we got in here, and then we're going to burn the place to the ground. Now, it's a real simple question for you, Dale. All you have to do, and as they raise a rifle and point it at you, just talk them out of it. What would you say?
Get me Mel Duncan.
Right, yeah, that's probably. Well, why don't we get Mel Duncan up here, right? Thank you so much, Mel. Really, so proud to have you here.
There you go.
Okay, here we are.
Fantastic.
Knowing, when I was talking with Jamie over dinner, she said that there was a time when she knew. And when I heard my colleagues tell their stories today, many of us were surprised where we are now. Not all of us, but at one point there was an opening and we knew. I do not want you going from here thinking that I am extraordinary. I am you. We all have that inner voice that we can listen to and know. One of my leaders today is Greta Thunberg, a young Danish woman who's 16 years old, who says that she has Asperger's syndrome. And she knows. She went to Davao and told the economic leaders there, I want you to act like your house is on fire, because it is. Our leadership is going to come from the Gretas, and in this room, from the Madeleines. Listen to our young people and listen to that inner voice. Thank you.